Happy equinox to you all. Just a few programmatic notes. So I'm going to be introducing the dean, who will then officially open this thing. Then Adam Nochek will introduce Maja and Nick of Foam. I'll introduce Tim. There'll be some Q&A afterwards. And then there's a reception at Hayden Library at 5:30 with an open bar and an immersive acoustic ecology experience. So we certainly, and this is to launch the vinyl album of Desert Sounds that Maja and Nick have generously put together with support from Institute for Humanities Research and Desert Humanities, Center for Philosophical Technology, and GEOS. And also some of Tim's books, some of his recent and top hits are for sale outside, and I have not asked him yet, but perhaps he will generously sign them. Yes, I'm getting the yes sign from that. So, here's an opportunity to read up on the latest in ecological thought. They're the forefront in futures of ecological thought. But right now, I'll turn it over to Dean Cohen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I just want to briefly give the dean's welcome. Welcome. We're really glad that you're here. But I do want to give you 2 minutes of backstory on Desert Humanities. So I've been Dean of Humanities here at ASU for a little more than a year now. And it's been a really happy year. I've been so pleased to be here. One of the first initiatives, though, that I wanted to do is because having been a faculty member at another university where we had the usual carousel of deans, new deans come in, they say, we're going to do these initiatives now, and then they leave, and new deans come in, we're going to do these initiatives, and it just kind of gets to a point where it feels like you're following all kinds of things. But one of the reasons that I was very much attracted to this position at ASU is because of the deep strengths and things that people are already doing, particularly among them environmental humanities. And there are many strengths here, but environmental humanities was one that really called to me as somebody who'd been working in that field. So early on, I gathered a group of 10 faculty members together who'd been doing work in environmental humanities and simply asked them the question of, if you had the resources, what kind of environmental humanities could you do here at ASU that would be particular to this place and to our students? And over a series of meetings, we came up with the idea of a desert humanities. And I just want to read you 2 very short paragraphs of description that came from the initial document that was generated. And this is a document written by 11 people. At the heart of the Desert Humanities is the insight that inquiry is located in the local, in this case, our Sonoran biome, but immediately scales up to the global desert dwelling worldwide, the planetary. Climate change means hundreds of cities will soon face desertification, and the cosmic. In fact, there are profound resonances between the Desert Humanities Initiative and the Interplanetary Initiative in the Natural Sciences. This initiative aims to intervene in conversations about climate change, living in extremes, and inclusive community by making clear how central the humanities are to the articulation of a humane and just future. The desert is the space that helps us plan for a complex global time to come, which is, in fact, already arriving. A domain of extremes, the desert challenges its inhabitants to imagine what a good life consists of, how to practice a sustainable and equitable mode of living that life, paying careful attention to the long history of human cultures attempting just that, and the relation of art and story to the creation of both. And I'm looking just very quickly in the audience, so I do want to acknowledge behind the crafting of this document and the crafting of this idea were Ron Brolio, Matt Bell, Dan Geffelin. Is there anyone else here that I'm not seeing? Yeah. So thank you to everyone that helped us to do it. And the one other thing that I will say to look for in the future is my friend Osvaldo Salo is here representing the Global Dryland Center, and we've been trying to work on a thing called the Desert Experience that will be coming soon. In other words, everything the Desert Humanities does is done in collaboration. Okay, enough about that. I just also want to say that it is a pleasure to have Tim Morton here with us today. I've been fortunate in that I've been able to collaborate on 3 projects with Tim and have always watched in awe as his work has changed over time, and I'm looking forward to what we have today. But Adam, I think it's over you to introduce them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Cohen. So I'm going to be introducing Maja Kuzmanovic and Nick Gaffney. And so in lieu of a sort of formal reading of a kind of bio, I want to offer a little more of a personal story about my experience with Maja and Nick. So I still remember the first time that I heard of foam. It was in 2008, and I was, at that time, working on my PhD at the University of Washington. Instead of writing my dissertation, I was busying myself with preparing a grant application for the Simpson Center for the Humanities. Together with Stacy Moran, I wanted to start a transdisciplinary studio for research and experimentation on technology and non-human affects. In the course of researching labs, studios, and centers with familiar themes and aspirations, I stumbled across foam, a network of transdisciplinary labs working at the intersection of art, science, nature, and everyday life, and animated, arguably, by a shared concern for speculative world building and political and social activism. I was completely enamored. Here were speculative artist researchers located in Brussels, but spread across the world with hubs in Scandinavia, the UK, Australia, and Japan, who not only produce arts-based research on themes as wide-ranging as machinic wilderness, biohacking, and mystical materialism, but also manage to do so outside of the academy. And as I soon discovered, they had been doing practice-based research on non-human ecologies long before many of us in the proverbial humanities discovered it in April 2007. I believe that's the exact month that the humanities officially became or moved beyond Kant. To me, in any case, and just about every other major conceptual artist, practitioner, and misfit working in Europe at that time, Maja Kuzmanovic and Nick Gaffney were the protectors and transmitters of occult knowledge operating at the intersection of non-human materials and post-human affectivity. To round out the story, I didn't receive the grant. The director of the Simpson Center told me, and I think rightly, that I should be writing my dissertation instead of planning my administrative career. Fair enough. But within the next 2 years, Stacy and I started a summer school in Amsterdam on design and philosophy, and Maja and Nick were some of our very first guests. Since then, Maja and Nick have become dear friends, collaborators, and fellow travelers. In 2015, Foam hosted my family in their artist in residency program, and it is during this time that difficult questions about animism, myth, and sustainable futures began to surface. Once I arrived at ASU and Ron Broglio magically came into my life, it was clear that a project with Foam on desert mythology, speculative practices, and attunement needed to happen. 2 years later, and many field labs, symposia, and experiments later, Maja and Nick are here to present on their experiences of desert attunement in the midst of what they call dusty imperatives and shadowy potentials. So without further ado, I want to hand the stage over to 2 people who I not only think of as practitioners from the future, time-traveling cosmists here to preach new-spheric geospirituality, but also, and most importantly, as dear friends and mentors from whom I have learned a great deal, and I think you all will too. So please give a warm welcome to Maja Kuzmanovic and Nick Gaffney from Foam.
Can we have the lights down? We had arrived in the Sonoran Desert, a place of desiccated time, layered time, geological, vegetal, human time. Here, time kneads the Earth's crust into deep folds, cracks, and canyons. Plants lay dormant through cycles of drought, or grow slowly for centuries, then bursting into blossom after the first rains. Humans come and go, blown through the ages like tumbleweeds. Things don't really decay here. They shrivel, dry up, or slowly rust, yet remain present while gradually eroding into dust. A thick, dusty atmosphere of things that were, things that are, and things that might be. Densities and intensities coagulating on a larger than human scale, illuminated by stark light or lurking in the deep shadow. The dust from the big beyond blows across the streets on the hot wind. It covers all surfaces, forms a thin crust and penetrates everything. A reminder that the heart of darkness is our neighbor. Hidden beneath otherworldly rocks. Others are listening too. An incomprehensible historical grammar of rock formations, alien plant morphologies with antennae into parallel presents and alternate futures. The rustle of slithering reptiles, the buzz of invisible insects, and thick webs woven by secretive arachnids. Our gradual attunement to the desert became an experiment in communing rather than examining, being part of the world without romanticizing wilderness or drawing hard distinctions between the desert and the cities within it. Attunement to the surfaces of the desert at the pace of modernity, at various speeds and human densities, along the path of time, where each step marks 1 million years. Space and time in the desert show themselves differently at speed. Driving through canyon country becomes a movie of geological magnitude. What began as a pale green plateau splits into dark, jagged lines, a crack in the earth. The crack widens into gorges and deepens into ravines. It splits open the landscape until the plateau disappears into the crags of raw rock face. Geological scar tissue as monument to the violent, persistent forces shaping the earth. Echoes of an era before the planet became hospitable to humans. Reminders not to take the Earth's hospitality for granted. A few hours, or a few moments later, time is adrift, scattered, discarded as it blows erratically along the roadside. The highway turns north into the painted desert. we glide through a gentler geological process, layered sedimentation of rock and sand and ash, the dust of minerals layered with the dust of forests and crushed bones, layered time of fossilized erosion. What might the thin layer of the Anthropocene look like when sedimented atop those older layers with hues of non-compostable plastics and industrial waste? And what layers might come next? What will cover the remnants of the human-dominated sliver of deep geological time? The parking lot near the horseshoe bend was busy enough for time's acceleration to the speed of gnats and twitching selfie sticks. We found ourselves in the wake of a Japanese hip-hop band, trailed by cosplay girls, followers in full regalia, teetering on the edge of the cliff in dainty high heels. Photogenic humans photographing themselves in photogenic topography. Attuning to digital mediation of landscapes framed at screen resolution. We were attuning to an insta-desert. The experience validated by small screens and prescribed perspectives. Carry water. Wear good shoes. No drones. We take the I-10 west, driving past dreams of free settlements crumbling in the unrelenting dryness and heat. Ghost towns, haunted utopias, evaporated opportunities. Human dwellings abandoned and desiccated. A scattering of burnt cars, shot up rusty cans, guns and God. Forgiven, yet not absolved. Desert Center, Amboy, Eagle Mountain Mine, waste. Waste of space, waste and space. Engineering mistakes leading to inadvertent ecological transformations, like the accidental yet complete drainage of the Colorado River in a series of mishaps that then produced the now semi-living Salton Sea. First Solar's energy farm became an unintended soil erosion machine. Half dust, half baked. What would a banishing ritual for these haunted utopias look like? Could they be transformed or gradually reused and recycled like airplanes in the Tucson boneyard? As Beckett echoes, try again, but fail better. What new worlds can emerge from this region swayed by unpredictability of heat waves, poor water distribution, and over-enthusiastic promises of the tech industry? We traveled through layers of signals, systems, and stories in search of the hardened sediment of mythical undercurrents. The libertarian ethos and Protestant work ethic rationed desert time into a neurotic drip and trickle of temporal scarcity. Time is submitted to a relentless economic valuation. Politicians gamble with a growing population, in a labyrinth of tax benefits, cheap real estate, and myopic risk tolerance. Scale up Arizona's 5 Cs. Work must continue no matter the conditions in this sand of the free, sprawl of the brave. And yet, a larger concern remains. Phoenix exists far from equilibrium, despite the desert, not with the desert. Holding onto an idealized image of urban life, haunted by the shadow of its possible demise. Kept alive by snowmelt. The myth of the Wild West in a desert on demand. And yet, here too could be found the American gods, the time-unbinding desert monks, and the Dionysian world of the carnival. So here we are, attuning to faint resonances, cultivating places of care and conviviality, increasing their porousness, from the space between the cells to the space between the stars. Welcome to Shadow Belmont, a place deeply familiar with shade. Shade architecture, shaded transport, sheltered time. A cityscape layered with a latticework of porches, pergolas, verandas, galleries, awnings, canopies, umbrellas, and trees. Closer to the ground, multi-trunked mesquite marquees diffuse light across outdoor kitchens and intimate courtyards. This is a city enfolded in the long temporality of the desert. It abides in time marked by feasts and silences. A world capable of sudden bursts of ecstatic actions, what like desert blooms after a rain. A city in a city, living the experiential time of spiders, snakes, and swallow. Attuned to the differentials and committed to the act. From independence to interdependence. From individual bodies to communal infrastructure. The city is continuously aligning with its changing conditions. A gradual redesign, from behavioral change to contorted comportment. This place does not shy away from its own shadow. The shadows of dust storms, water shortages, gun-slinging individualism, heat delirium, and venomous critters. The fickleness of the desert and its inhospitable heart. The nameless dust clouds and rocky outcrops, the social insects in their frantic mounds, the shy reptilian monsters and passive-aggressive choyas, the gloomy spirits of cell towers and brooding pygmy owls. With drought cycles lengthening, water tokens fluctuating, and heat waves becoming less predictable, self-reliance is gradually finding a place alongside intergenerational commons management, stewarding the preciousness of life in a desert teeming with life. We traveled onwards as clouds loomed on the horizon. Storm clouds, dust clouds, clouds of invisible pollution. What appeared as pristine desert could harbor an atmosphere filled with airborne toxic dust and deadly groundwater. We followed clues from the Center for Land Use Interpretation, driving through Tuba City. It's a town known for its uranium mill from 1956 to 1966. The scars both visibly and invisibly remain. Attuning to this landscape gave rise to a visceral sense of unease, displacement, halting conversations, prolonged awkward silences, and the hollow taste of unseen dread, skewed injustices. Just outside of town, we found the uranium disposal cell, framed by barbed wire and DOE warning signs. This cell is a hermetic, dull scar, far from the spectacle of an atomic city. It's a uniformly dark gray and rectangular cut into an amorphous, arid plateau, geometrically attempting to outlast the half-life of uranium. An eerie regularity in stark contrast to the nearby coal mine canyon, whose contours continue to change over time, sculpted by erosion into gracefully intricate carvings. A temple of lithic giants under a brooding sky, worshipped only by flocks of ravens and the occasional human. The next morning, as we returned to Saguaro country, the clouds parted and temperature rose. We continued our deceleration from 5,000 miles in a day, 1,000 miles in a week, to 1 mile in 10 days. We arrived and we stayed put. We listened, experiencing the desert at 0 miles per hour as the warm light of the afternoon intensified into a blood-hued sunset, then faded into cool shades of dusk. The longer we remained still, the more frequently our neighbors visited. Hummingbirds, lizards, insects, crows, a pack of coyotes, deer, javelina, even a solitary shapeshifter. The nocturnal scuttlings of unseen beasts, the brutal nonchalance of bats eating crickets, a mundane spectacle of the everyday, indifferent to our arrival. Amidst this teeming habitat on the edge of urbanity, we began eavesdropping on the incomprehensible conversations of animate matter. Dust and cacti, trees and insects, concrete and sunlight. What could their voices tell us about this place? What technologies could provide a way of communicating or communing within the narrow band of human awareness? What would those technologies look like that could help us attune to our surroundings rather than distracting us from them? How could we help ourselves listen, really listen to the entities we share the planet with? The Saguaro, the dawn chorus, the omnipresent engines, and our fellow humans. Woodpeckers playing metal chimneys, thrashers mimicking police sirens, howling conversations between dogs and coyotes at dusk. Above and through it all, vast geological scales cast their long shadows, imposing a silent, harsh indifference. We crossed the threshold into the Papago Park, a dim tunnel under a busy highway. We decelerated, listening. The soundscape was subsumed into the deep drone of traffic. In cities built around cars, mere walking can feel like an act of resistance and an act of hope. Purposeful walking and aimless wandering alike. An embodied reading of the landscape as it is and as it could be. World walking, world knowing, and world building together. Accompanied by the constant hum of cars and insects beneath a busy flight path. We walked slowly, in single file, waiting for each step to find its footing, traversing inner and outer landscapes simultaneously. We traced the edges of the city and the desert, attuning to their complex relationships. Rhythms above and below with sharp interludes. Along a path beset by the specter of an abandoned railroad, hollow and dusty. Snaking along a resonant ridge haunted by jet engines in the wind. Climbing through an outcrop of boulders, hearing the rustling of sparse undergrowth, a swarm with crickets and critters signaling. A gentle turn revealed soundscapes of civilization in collapse. Hushed darkness cut through the eerie river of taillights. A descent into the dripping, budding, and chirping of early spring. The hollow dryness of a rustling desert, gradually receding into the night of unseen others, uncanny and quiet. we let our minds wander, spinning new yarns, possible lives lived otherwise, of vapor trails writing their poetry in the colors of sunset. Thank you.
So hopefully you're attuned a bit. It's my pleasure to introduce Tim Morton, who's the, I'll read the official bio and then a little background afterwards. Tim Morton's the Rita Shea Golf Chair in English at Rice University, and he's collaborated with Bjork, Jennifer Wallish, Jeff Bridges, Olaf Eliasson, Farrah Williams. He's co-wrote and appears in Living in the Future's Past, a 2018 film about global warming with Jeff Bridges. And he's the author of Being Ecological, Human Solidarity, Humankind Solidarity with Non-Human People, Dark Ecology, For a Logic of Future Coexistence, Nothing, 3 Inquiries in Buddhism, Hyperobjects, Philosophy and Ecology After the End of the World, Realist Magic, Objects, Ontologies, Causality, The Ecological Thought, Ecology Without Nature, and 8 other books and 200 essays on philosophy, ecology, literature, music, art, architecture, design, and food. His work has been translated into 10 languages. In 2014, Morton gave the Welk Lectures in Theory. And let me say, Tim's work, to me personally, and I think to many people, is fundamentally about dwelling. It's the old Heideggerian stick that that humans dwell within language. And Tim's done a wonderful job of writing poetically in ways that bend the prison house of how we dwell and help us think of a porous dwelling space with a more than human world. I often kid with my students that I'm not a theorist. I haven't coined any terms. But Tim's made up for that in many registers. He fashions language in a way that allows us to see in new ways and to creates modalities for thinking new possibilities. And I think that's the best of what we have to offer as humanists and theorists for thinking of futures that could be marked out. I have this idea of, we have our new Desert Humanities sort of T-shirt. It just says "Care of the Saguaro." That says "Care of the Possible." And so many futures have already been marked out by global capital and neoliberalism, that we have to preserve the possibilities of other futures. and I'm grateful to introduce to you Tim Morton, who is showing us some of those other possible futures.
Hello, everybody. Hi. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Ron, and it's very nice of you to come, and I'm honoured to be here. Can you hear me vaguely? Yeah, good. For some reason, this talk is called Self-Explanatory Planetary Information, and I'm going to do something. First of all, I'm going to issue a trigger warning. I'm a survivor. And in this talk, I'm going to be saying things about sexual assault that may be deeply triggering. They are for me, but I feel it's my responsibility to talk about them. But you're not obliged to hear me talking about them, so if you want to leave, I shan't be offended at all. In fact, I shall be cheering you on, and quite a lot of me wants to leave right now too. Thank you for laughing. Thank you for laughing slightly more. But I'm the one responsible for this lecture, so I need to stay. And now for a lecture that seems to be about music and sound, right up until the point at which it isn't. We all use the word rhythm, but it takes some effort to figure out what it actually might mean. The word derives from two Greek words, one of which means measurement. Rhythm isn't just about counting. What exactly is being counted? The other Greek word means body fluids, and in general, the body as such is a fluid. The thing called body, did we really talk enough about it in the later 1980s, which is when I started out as a PhD student? This thing called body as such is itself a liquid. What is meant by regularity, counting, measurement when it comes to these fluids? And what is meant by fluid? And can exploring this help us to develop forms of ecological aesthetics and politics? Forms of them, in other words, that have to do with less or indeed much less violent relations between humans and non-humans. Yes. I'm Tim Morton. Thanks for listening to my presentation. Has anybody got any questions? So I was at this sexuality seminar in Berlin, and I was performing in my opera, Time, Time, Time. And I was taking part in a dialogue called The Politics of Time with the organizer of the Märzmusik Festival. It was March of this year. It was so great to see my old colleague and friend Elizabeth Freeman doing such a great job in the seminar, in particular talking about the role of time in sexuality. In particular, she was talking about suspension, how overlapping temporalities, the phenomenological structure of waiting, the relative motion between my time and your time. I was very keen on thinking about all this, as I always am, and in particular because I found I'd been saying something very similar to Beth in a different key. In particular, there's a bit in the opera where someone says, if I have to undergo your time, just your time, all the time, that's called oppression. It's really creepy. Thank you for almost laughing, yeah? It's really creepy how this oscillates between pleasure and pain. Brutal violence and masochistic pleasure, as the next few lines demonstrate. Sometimes automation is required. Can you feel it? Do you like it? The way Martin Schmidt of Matmos intones it is unforgettable, and I can't wait to get him in a studio with the rest of the band and have him record that. In particular, he uses a vocal transformer to make his voice more and more metallic and deeper. The point about the opera is that all kinds of human experiences and ideas and feelings are coordinated with all kinds of cosmic, biological and chemical phenomena, so that you can't quite tell which is illustrating which. So along with the voice of MC Schmidt asking whether you like it, goes a slowly and intensely crescendoing sub-bass wave that starts with a double bass player tapping her instrument with her bow and ends with Lee Patterson concocting a gigantic wave from the tiny, amazing wooden and metal things at his disposal. This part of the opera hurts. It's scary, and it's very hard for me because I made the libretto out of Tim Morton trauma space, mostly, and it's a good job the audience can't and doesn't know that, but my case history is pretty irrelevant in the end. So there's a colossal crescendo of bass. You know how bass is a gigantic wave that passes through you? A sub-bass wave may start at one end of this room, peak somewhere in the middle, and only begin to trough as it passes out through the wall. All the way through the opera, there's video footage and graphics on a big screen behind us. The section's visuals are the two black holes colliding in September 2015 and unleashing a gravity wave. Isn't that funny? In a way, to say two black holes colliding in September 2015. Uncanny, even. Isn't this further detail also disturbing? The black holes are about the size of New Jersey. Not like our sun at all. They themselves, as massive objects go, were kind of small in terms of their diameter in extensional spacetime. My hyperobject warning light is pinging like mad. The collision of the black holes resulted in their fusion and the release of an energy equivalent to that of the entire universe in that moment. That's right. The energy output from the collision equaled the rest of the universe. A gigantic gravity wave pulsed out. You know what's amazing about gravity? Light bounces off of stuff. That's why you can see things. Gravity passes through everything. Everything. It doesn't stop. To me, an armchair physicist, this implies, by the way, that there's only one graviton and that it's the gigantic wave packet we call universe, a wave rippled with little versions of itself, like the fractal telephone waves studied at Bell Labs long ago, little versions called black holes, and that the huge amplitude and ultra-low frequency of the graviton and the fact that there's only one of them is why people can't fit the other fundamental forces with it, aka reconcile quantum theory with relativity theory, because they're looking for little tiny dots of gravity, not something huge like that's also the vector of a tiny dot called the Big Bang singularity. Luckily, as you can see, I'm not employed by a physics department, nor do physicists listen to me. Anyway, gravity doesn't stop. So it washed through everything, and on one fine day in September 2015, it passed through Earth and all its inhabitants. As the opera says, you got a little bit smaller and aged a little bit slower, then you got a little bit bigger and aged a little bit faster, but you didn't notice because everything else did the same thing. It was the best moment in physics in my lifetime. I cried. It was awesome. Anyway, make of it what you will. Human trauma space is mapped onto black holes colliding. In both instances, one being is swallowed in another's temporality as the black holes eat each other, or as your parents have sex in the room next door, or whatever you want to imagine. I'm sitting there on a meditation cushion performing what I like to call the thought instrument, because it seemed to the composer Jennifer Walsh and me that it wouldn't be right to posit me as a kind of Svengali who pulls the strings behind the scenes with a libretto as a kind of with the libretto, but rather as just another instrument in the band. And I'm sitting there mostly feeling really triggered at that point. A deep bass wave lets you hear what waves are made of, pulses, beats. If you hit something fast enough, the hitting turns into a tone. That's what a tone is. It's an audible pulsing of beats. A tone is a function of rhythm. I always think that when I read a poem or a story, and I think about its atmosphere, and indeed whenever I listen to music. My friend Judith Roof has just finished a book on tone, that vague-seeming term that is, in fact, as I've just suggested, incredibly specific, measurable even. I'd like to say at this point that all my family are musicians. I've been undergoing their time all the time. What I've concluded in general from being a musician and from observing them up close over breakfast cereal, or rather the fish fingers for lunch, because one of them had been playing in Jesus Christ Superstar, it was the 1970s, until the middle of the night, is that you can be in time if you're a musician, but never on time. Thank you. In 2014, I was privileged to go to the far Arctic Norway and be part of an installation by the Dutch sound artist Ravi Gantrao. His long-wave synthesis. It was set up near to the town of Kirkenes, within a Nazi gun emplacement near the ocean. One gigantic homemade speaker was pumping out the most extraordinary bass wave, sped up 80 times so that human ears could hear it. That seemed to be it, but that was just the delivery mechanism. It had to be homemade, by the way, because no existing speaker had the ability to pump out such deep sounds. It was really long or deep, or whatever you want to say that dimension is. I'm thinking more and more that adding an ecological context to interpretation is what was left out of the New Left consensus of the later 1960s, the one that meant the rise of literary theory, and the importance we instill in our students of finding how texts engage with race and gender, even when they don't explicitly engage with race and gender. Now, the thing about ecological contexts is that you can't really draw a line around them in advance. We're dealing with a potential infinity of entities on a potential infinity of scales. There's no way to ascertain whether the pleroma of beings has an end point, at least not in advance. Ecological awareness just is this context explosion. Ravi Gantrao's work on infrasound is a very, very powerful case in point. It has the merit of sounding just like an explosion. Context explosion in everything sharp major or something. Something like that should be the title or maybe the subtitle. The actual title is Long Wave Synthesis. So here's how it works. Very large entities such as mountains and oceans sometimes move in such a way that the vibrations create sound far too deep for humans to hear. These waves of sound travel across Earth, sweeping up all kinds of entities in their waveforms. You can record and broadcast infrasound, but you have to build a very special long speaker to push the wave through efficiently, and you have to speed it up about 80 times so that humans can hear it. An incredibly deep, loud roar, the likes of which you've never heard. Well, you sort of have. It's like the soft roar that is part of the signature of an explosion. Not the shattering sounds, but the pervasive rumble. Infrasound is like chocolate pudding. A small teaspoon full of it has as much information as a huge bowl of it, because the wave is so huge. Because the wave is so large, it's likely that the information it contains is distributed fairly evenly throughout the structure. To that extent, it's weirdly like a hologram in which parts of the interference pattern contain the whole object imaged by the process. A small piece of a hologram of a rose will display a rose when you shine the light on it. There's probably more than a superficial analogy here, because infrasound probably does take that form of an interference pattern. And why is that? Because the infrasonic wavefront picks up everything else. The wave traveling across the ocean scoops up the shape of the mountains over which it pours, the buildings around which it rushes, airplanes, earthquakes, bomb tests. It's a beautiful, powerful illustration of a very basic but very deep Heideggerian observation, that you never hear the wind as such. You only hear the wind in the doorway, the wind in the trees. Objects are withdrawn, so you never get so you only ever get access, and everything else only ever accesses translations of them. Now imagine all the largest objects on Earth translating one another simultaneously. The sound that made, that would be the limit of infrasound. Now I think you're ready for the full title of Gantrao's work, which we quite happily figured out that a few days later. Long wave synthesis for pneumatic compressor, 10-bar pneumatic hose, pneumatic transducer, birch plywood compression, motor vehicle pistons, auroral air displacement, barometric pressure, Barents Sea offshore rig gas flares, wolf howls, relative humidity, Lord Rayleigh, pressure waves, travelling waves, Atlantic Ocean standing waves, microbarons, wind speed, wind shear, wind orientation, kinesthetic orientation, air mass, skin pressure, meteographs, stomach resonance, ear canal depth, woolen hat transmission, frost fungus, rusted metal, concrete walls, mobile listeners, weather suits, shrubbery absorption, discarded wooden panelling, assorted gravel, distance between air molecules, mountain range turbulence, pond oscillations, moss rock surface textures, thickness of atmosphere, Earth circumference, 15-inch transducer, jet stream shear, stratosphere circulations, troposphere temperature inversion, Earth rotation drag, space debris re-entry, asphalt friction, reindeer hoof impact, soil conduction, shooter heel transmission, eat your heart out, Lamont Young, shockwave reverberation, impact engineering, iron ore mining, carving Arctic glaciers, TNT, World War I gun sound ranging, Icelandic volcanoes, chemical explosions, nuclear proliferation, CT-BT, nuclear test ban monitoring, long-range communication, XLR signal cables, speaker cables, 240-volt power cable, 24-volt signal multiplication circuit, 400-watt amplifier, power phase inverter, 1200-watt power supply, 4.5 kilowatt diesel generator, thunder jet engines, meteor explosions, supersonic flight, Cracker Tower, Kirkenes Airport, Luftwaffe's Arctic front, impeller acoustics, 1440 RPM rotor transducer, 2.4 gigahertz laptop computer, 5,000-year-old Brummers, Scandinavian bull roarer, 500-second waveforms, 4 AM snow crystals, 24-hour recording from Bardufoss 1537 array, September 12th. 2014. Did you get that? Infrasound is literally the sound of context, exploding. And the way it explodes undermines the idea of nicely bounded holes that poof out big enough to contain their parts in a nice unified group. The longer the title goes on, the more it threatens to open up an abyss. Holes might be boreholes that go so deep down that we can't fathom their depth. Anyway, the sub-bass wave peaks and the harp goes ping, and there's silence, and you're subjected to another temporality, that of Anya O'Dwyer and her amazing harp and voice. This temporality, we're back to time. This temporality is what I think of as being an embryo or being what astronomy calls Ultima Thule. Ultima Thule is a strange object in the Kuiper belt, right at the edge of the solar system. It's so cold out there that it's as if only a brief time has passed since the formation of the solar system as such. Ultima Thule looks like two gigantic rocks fused together like a Buddhist or Hindu Vajra or thunderbolt symbol. But it's not just about a specific kind of time or specific kind of human or non-human series of actions and responses and attunements. For me, this is about everything. You know how for me time is suspension as such, the relative motion of past over future, right? So, very simply, like, my face is obviously a map of all the things that happened to my face, right? Like, so when I was 19 years old, I had really, really bad acne. I was one of the first Accutane patients in Britain because of that. But then again, so that's the past, right? And then again, who is this Tim Morton guy anyway, right? You don't know yet. Neither do I. That's the future, yeah. This thing we call present is a kind of reification that you can specify to whatever kind of length you want, depending on what you want to do. But really what's happening in the world is like the sort of relative motion that you feel when you walk up a stopped escalator, right? Like the past and the future are sliding over each other without touching. And that's sort of what a thing is. It's like a junction between past and future. So like a poem, right? It's the same, right? It's a whole bunch of decisions that somebody or somebodies or something made. It doesn't have to be a human being. That's all the past, right? Like let's have iambic pentameter here and let's do a little rhyme there, right? That's the past. But what does this poem mean? How many readings of this poem are there? That's the future. So, rhythms of what? It can't just be one rhythm measuring another one because there's already a rhythm. See what I mean? What's that one? So again, I'm going to talk about the etymology of rhythm and now I'm going to add how it implies evolution, biology, and in particular symbiosis. How, in other words, the whole notion of rhythm as such implies ecology. It's not that some rhythms are pertinent to ecology, it's that, let's say it again, rhythm as such is an ecological phenomenon. So rhythm, it means the regular measurement of things that are already flowing, moving, dripping, pulsing. Where does it all come from? In the end, a thing is much more like a liquid than a solid. For us OOO types, it's precisely this slick, fluid thing that you can't grasp because when you try to, your hands go through it and it gets under your skin. Rhythm is when you make one time undergo another time. Yours, for example, as you count out beats. You quantize the fluids. Some of us know what quantize means, and some don't, right? Well, if you've ever tinkered with GarageBand on the Mac, and you'll have a sense of it. But if you haven't, think about it this way. Imagine you have a baguette. You want to give your 5 gets equal chunks of it, so you think to cut it into fifths. But just then a 6th guest shows up, and to be fair, you now need to cut it into sixths. Everyone will get a smaller piece, but everyone will get the same piece. In the same way, you can quantize music based on how finely grained you want the rhythm to be. If you quantize for 16th notes, you'll generally get something that fits the 4-to-the-floor disco you're composing because that's the kind of thing you like to do of an evening. If you quantize to 32nd notes, you'll cut it too fine and you're bad, if you're me, keyboard playing, will start to show as it becomes clear that you can't play each note as rhythmically, aka as regularly as that. Algorithmic quantization by computational devices necessarily imposes all kinds of ideas about what rhythm and tempo and music as such are on the music you're making, just as a piano with its equal temperament imposes all kinds of ideas about what scales and tones and chords are on the music you're making. And since I observe tones are made of beats, temperament and quantization are kind of the same thing. A regular old piano is tuned according to very specific ratios between one note and the next, and these ratios are complicated and fractional in order precisely to avoid a specific kind of rhythm, the one called beating. You can hear beating at the start of Time, Time, Time. We're all down with beating at the opera team. Lee Patterson generates a tone, then he generates a tone ever so slightly out of phase with it so that a smooth-sounding note begins to pulsate. 2 notes are overlapping, but since all things, including tones, are necessarily out of phase with themselves, because of this past sliding over the future thing, it's just exactly what exist means, even in the strict etymological sense, or as David Byrne puts it, I'm catching up with myself. Because of that, things as such pulsate without being pushed or beaten by something else. To exist as such, all in your little ownsome, is to pulsate, which is the basic essence of my particular form of OOO ontology, and the reason why quantum theory can be true. You can quantize the fluids as you wish, depending on what kind of purpose you have. Want to take Australia from the Aborigines? Want to travel around the Cape of Good Hope to latch onto those Spice Islands? Want to impose a monoculture on them when you figure out they're not what you thought? All those spices growing under your control, all that monoculture, culturing cinnamon in exchange for cheap rice, then you can increase the amplitude of the profit wave by a huge factor. Fernand Braudel writes the definitive account, I think, in the Structures of Everyday Life, and make a killing when you sell the stuff to cinnamon-ready post-Crusades Europeans. You need to do it fast because the Dutch are also doing it, and you need to use all kinds of new financial instruments like credit that imply time and the undergoing of another's time, the kind of venture that says something true about reality itself, why capitalism is really effective and powerful and also distorted, why it's terrible and causing planet death if used properly for several hundred years, or rather, if left to run, its rhythms swallowing ours and all the cinnamon trees' rhythms and all the coral rhythms and all the ice rhythms. All those ready-cooked geese flying into your mouth in the ad for capitalism, unwittingly written by a bunch of monks called the Land of Cocaine. That's also in the opera, by the way. First you cook the goose, then you fire it out of something towards the open mouth of the guy in the Bruegel painting. The trick is to make it look like the goose is flying of her own accord. But to give you a goose meat sandwich, I have to make it and then toss it in your general direction really fast if it's a turkey sandwich and I'm a shopkeeper in a New York deli. The goose speaks in rhythm herself, crying geese all hot, like the labels on the sandwiches you can buy at a deli or an automat like Pret-a-Manger in London. When you heat up a ready meal, you're obviously undergoing a corporation's time and a microwave's time in the service of forcing some turkey to undergo your time and fly into your mouth. I could go on all evening. The spice race was very much the same thing as the space race. An object caused a desire to beat the other European countries to it, motivated the creation of special rhythmical devices such as perspective geometry and financial credit in order to boldly go where no one had gone before and discover what was already taken to be the case. And when the real didn't match that reality, it was rhythmically divided up and made into monocultures that did match. Voila! In a way, the moon landing was indeed faked, insofar as the whole thing was a product of the technologies that measured, travelled, and returned. The moon's rhythms were caught in the rhythms of the Cold War. The current interlocking ecological crises can be described in terms of different rhythms overlapping, appropriating, and imposing themselves upon one another. In other words, different fluids, or, as from different bodies influence one another to produce events that are beyond the normal senses of world historical. They are planet historical. A less violent coexistence could be described in terms of allowing lots and lots of rhythms to run without quantizing them or otherwise appropriating them to human purposes. When the clouds dripping, as Yoko puts it on the back of the Imagine album, inspires you to dig a hole in your garden, as Yoko also says on the back of that album. Shimmering, moving without being pushed. This idea that things are already kind of pulsing all by themselves, yeah? This is why pulsing can happen, why pleasure, why oppression, why pain, why time that can heal as well as hurt. We confuse impermanence with entropy, but, double-sided printing. But impermanence means that things can heal. Think about it. Now I'm going to say a thing that was said before. I'm a repetition freak for all kinds of reasons. I'm going to say the exact same thing, and it's going to mean the same kind of thing, only a bit out of phase, because I'm saying it now, and I'm saying it again. Here it is. Since all things, including tones, are necessarily out of phase with themselves, it's just exactly what exist means. Even in the strict etymological sense, or as David Byrne puts it, I'm catching up with myself. Because of that, things such pulsate without being pushed or beaten by something else. To exist as such, all in your little ownsome, is to pulsate, which is the basic essence of my ontology and the reason why quantum theory can be true. Little tiny tangential shout out to the humanities, and against STEM coming, brace for impact. What if, to repeat something again, the universe was indeed one pulsation thing shimmering away all in its ownsome, a graviton? Sounds right to me. What do I know? but I think humanists should help scientists. Scientists do the past. They do patterns in data. We do the future. We do the possibility that things could be different. We reread patterns. We change the past. The feminist Carla Lonzi observed that the women's movement is not simply international, but also planetary. Patriarchy, a key component in the deep structure of global warming, requires a planetary, not simply an international response. But this doesn't mean getting back in touch with the rhythms of nature. Far from it. What it means is radically de-reifying those rhythms, not imposing the disastrous concept of the natural onto the biosphere, which at every scale pulses and drips and flows with its infinite plenitude of non-human and human rhythms. So an institution that's called a Centre for Acoustic Ecology is precisely one that coordinates and promotes less violent coexisting between life forms in a way that is deeply in sync with feminism's, post-colonial and decolonial theory, and an institution that promotes those is indeed itself a centre for acoustic ecology. Acoustic ecology in the non-logocentric, non-prepackaged way, not as theistic and therefore at least at some point patriarchal, pre-formatted NIMBYisms, but as a radical exploration and enactment of how shimmering beings coexist and intertwine. Because this biosphere at any scale isn't my backyard, so the not in my backyard vibe is on the side, I'm afraid, of the oppressors, even if it seems not to be. So why did I call this lecture self-explanatory, planetary information? Well, for one, it seemed to me that what rhythm could mean, the counting or beating of one thing by another, or indeed by itself, the way its past and future are out of phase, are autonomous from anthropocentric rhythms and rhythm concepts. They explain themselves insofar as they require careful listening, like Messiaen recording birdsong. But also because the not very great rapper Mr. C wrote that phrase as part of a song called Boss Drum by the Shaman from my days of being what used to be called a cheesy quaver, aka a raver, in the early 1990s. It's not even that good as techno goes. The rapping in particular leaves a lot to be desired. But things do and must explain themselves, mustn't they? Like how esoteric liturgies contain commentaries and colophons that don't swaddle the text in plastic metalinguistic fantasy meaning, but are actively woven into it and a part of it and are it. In fact, the higher up you go, the more you seem to be pointing out exactly what you're doing and exactly what is happening, and that in itself is the liturgy. It's like how NASA speak is so spellbinding. It's an incantation. To hear someone saying self-explanatory planetary information in a techno tune is to hear that tune telling you what it is, what it's doing. Like any disco music, it's sort of liturgy that takes you over and over and over, subjecting your time to its time, making you undergo it, making you think, perhaps, that you have become the very worst thing that white Western patriarchy can imagine, hence its sadistic fantasies of rape and colonialism on every possible physical and psychic level, the dreaded object. Because we imagine objects just how patriarchy likes it, static solids. Why not as liquids, as things that pulsate all on their ownsome without needing to be pushed, without requiring submission to another's temporality? The very thing we call subject has been made to submit like that. That's why a British passport used to say, and may again soon say, for all I know, subject of Her Majesty the Queen. I've got the two most embarrassing passports on the planet. It's a competition. Yeah. It's like how America so often imagines childhood as non-sexually innocent, a concept entirely caught up in regimes of paedophilic harm. Freud asked a deep and taboo and therefore quite scientific question: how come childhood sexual abuse hurts so much? Because there is already sexuality, because a body pulses all by itself before it gets subjected to another. The concept of libido, thought thus, is of a virtual fluid like the prana of yoga, a derivative of all kinds of flows and liquids and movements that has its own reality and is not reducible simply to its parts, but whose parts are not totally expressed as libido as such. Hence the tension between the poor physical body and the writhing undead libido. Libido, in other words, when you think of it this way, is definitely an OOO object. And the tension between one poor physical body and its libido and that of an abuser or rapist or assaulter. Children are not ready-made objects waiting to fly into the maws of adults, like the geese in the land of cocaine. And Me Too is the best thing that happened in a long while to social space. And Me Too is a huge wave on a gigantic ocean of child sexual abuse. Think of how it started to appear in the media with Nari Nasser, or just ask my retired social worker mum who put people in prison for it on a regular basis. I'm sorry to say it's everywhere, hiding in plain sight. As we enter an ecological age, this gigantic ocean must be radically addressed, or we don't get to coexist with the coral, and there is no coral, in fact. If you really want to know, I think it's no accident at all that Me Too and Extinction Rebellion, and in particular Extinction Rebellion youth, are synchronized political phenomena. If you want something to think about as you rubberneck like me, like a deer in the headlights, the assaulter-in-chief, whose recent excesses are surely synchronized with the rest of Jeffrey Epstein, then here you are. Something else yet deeply related is happening. Something very, very good. Thank you.
So yeah, we'll bring up a few chairs and do some Q&A then.
You just got one? You got two? So one for on stage and one for the questions?
Sounds good. That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay, is someone going to field the questions?
Yeah, I'll fill it.
You're going to be down here?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, here we go.
So you guys get to pass this. And we'll take questions.
Hello. So there's another chair. I just thought I'd point that out.
Not sure. Okay.
Yeah, given the sort of the collaboration between your two presentations, I actually very recently attended this sort of inaugural meeting of Extinction Rebellion Phoenix on Saturday, and I know you brought them up in your discussion earlier. If there's something that you would want to have articulated to this group of people, especially in the context of Phoenix, what would you offer anyone?
Wow, that's putting us on the spot. What we can offer. While it's important to the activism of Extinction Rebellion is extremely important. It's also very important to actually experience the environment they're in while it is still here. So the combination of wanting to change and kind of make the world a better place, there has to be something that also kind of is an enjoyment of the present.
Gosh, it's a big question. I get worried about the optics. It's not about Extinction Rebellion as such. It's not about Extinction Rebellion youth at all. But it's about the mediatization. Is that a word? I didn't ever say that word before. Mediation? How many syllables should it have? Yeah, that thing that happens to people when they get put in the paper and on the telly, you know. And of course, what I worry about is that people end up looking at a beautiful, holy sermon on perfection in a kind of metaphorical Sunday morning space in order to feel appropriately guilty when they go back on Monday morning to carry on doing the oil stuff. And so I like I said earlier today, I actually interviewed Extinction Rebellion youth from London last week, so I can't talk to the Arizona situation. But I think the thing that we can offer them is to actually ask them what they want from us. which is what I did in the interview, you know. And they all said, well, you should join us and help out. I said, that's sort of great, because I'm obviously not youth, you know. I'm Extinction Rebellion. I did get carded in the Boys and Girl bar the other day, which is rather extraordinary. White hair, you know, so what's going on? But I'm not exactly sure what my role could be, but that's up to them to sort of decide what that's going to be, you know. I think people need like psychological help, actually. I can only really think about this stuff for like 1 second a day without wanting to cry, go in the fetal position. So most of what I do in my job is just bluffing. You know, you can say things like mass extinction, but if you really think about it, it's not funny, you know. There's a group of psychotherapists in Britain who started sort of their version of ecotherapy, right? Caroline Hickman is leading them. I was very pleased to find out that they're working with Extinction Rebellion youth and Greta Thunberg in particular. That person must be under a huge amount of pressure and a sense of perfection that must be sort of agony in some way. I get very worried about her, actually. But I'm glad that there's this group of ecotherapists. There's a bit strangely, they used some of my ideas to create this ecotherapy model. And I didn't realize that, but there's like a big team of them training Extinction Rebellion right now. We all need that vis-a-vis this ecological disaster that's happening, but they need it a lot. You know, so I think as humanistic scholars or artists, am I vaguely right, like most people are in this room, we can ask them what they want and really listen, because that's what we're good at doing, and then we can kind of do it, hopefully.
I noticed that you used a lot of humor in your presentation. Is that, you know, a method of coping with some of these things, or do you see it as part of that pulsing quality of life?
Oh, that's lovely to ask that question. Do you mind me saying another thing? Like, is it okay? Don't want to be hogging it, but like, Well, I'll tell you a story, which is like I started trying to write this opera with Jennifer Walsh, right? Like, so we talked for 2 years, mostly just about feelings and stuff and our lives and everything. And then at one point, she just said, go, you know, I started writing. And of course, for the first day or so, I was like, oh, I'm going to write an opera now. It's going to be really important, you know. So I tried to write really important things. And I managed to write like 4 lines like that. And then it just like petered out. And when I started putting words like and whatever and sort of in there, it started to work again. I started like smile, you know. And for me, actually, it's not deliberate. It's an accident. So it's more towards the second sort of node of what you're saying there. And in a way, for me, having an idea and getting a joke, which is the same thing as making a joke, are exactly the same. They're not just like each other, they are the exact same thing, right? Because if you think about it, an idea is like joining a known thing, like how you're thinking stuff, to an unknown thing. You didn't know this thing before. It's like joining a conscious thing to an unconscious thing, and when that thing happens, there's an energy release, which is aha, you know, which is the kind of laughter, punchline moment, you know. I think tragedy's actually a kind of twisted part of comedy space, you know? Like, when you watch one person going through the motions, like a priest in a Catholic mass, and they're called Oedipus, and they're like, oh, I can escape from my embodiment. Oh shit, I made it worse. I've just married my mum. You know, like, that is called a tragedy, but when you watch like 10 people doing it, it's called Fawlty Towers, right? So in a way, it's like, so comedy's deeper than tragedy, and kind of everything coexisting without deleting is kind of comedy, right? Like emotionally, right? Like you've got all these different emotions coexisting, like in a nice, healthy ecosystem. Nothing's really gaining advantage over anything. So comedies can have sadness, and they can have grief, and they can have joy, and they can have hilarity, right? And all these things don't sort of delete, yeah. So I guess that's sort of it. It's more like an accident, It's a happy accident because, like I say, what we're dealing with is uncanny and weird and disturbing, could make you laugh and or panic at the same time. I'm interested in that, but it's mostly just an accident.
So maybe time for one more question, if there's something.
I was interested, watching your film and your performance, to wonder what were some of the key qualities of the environment that you spent time in that you felt were notable, special, informed your work?
So one of them, well, the most obvious one, because we live in Belgium, which is kind of the opposite environmentally. It's a swamp, a cold, kind of damp swamp. So the quality of the environment that was immediately obvious to our bodies, literally, was the cracking dryness and the extremes. So there are much more extremes of everything, of light and dark and kind of the dry and then the flash floods and we also notice that in the culture that emerges from this environment, while again contrasting to the lowlands where everything's about compromise and you can't really take a position to the kind of got my gun and So that was the initial quality. Another one was I haven't spent a lot of time in the desert. Nick comes from Australia, so he is more familiar with it. That I expected the desert to be much more empty and kind of nothingness and large expanses and all of that, but it's actually so full of life, and life that is so alien to me, but at the same time really resonant and drawing me in. It's kind of like a drug. So I think that would be it.
Okay, well, with that, please let's with the drug of the desert, let's thank our panelists. We're reminded that Sonoran has the word for sonorous or sound in it, and so thank you for both attending this desert attunement. And the reception is at Hayden Library with the Acoustic Ecology Salon, and you can listen to a bit of the album that Maja and Nick have put together. So please join us. Thank you.
Can I just say something? Just about this Acoustic Ecology Salon for the people who are at the university here, that it's a room in the library that is an installation, but it's also is going to continue being a study room. So it's a place for you to keep developing your desert ideas in. So please use it. It's open until 8th of December. And it's going to keep growing and evolving. And the lovely people from the library are going to keep adding books in there. So come back and repeat. And is he here? There has been one person here, Luke. Luke, where are you? He's okay. He's the chief architect who built the structure that you're going to see, and we just wanted to really deeply thank him for his work. He's not here.
Thank you.
Thank you.